Hi, my name's Trish Roberts and you're listening to LiveVegan. This is podcast number 22. I wanted to share with you a post by Brockway Hall, who wrote a piece called Our Conflicted Attitudes Towards the Death of Animals. He wrote this Tuesday, June 21st, 2011. He writes, "The following is a research paper I recently wrote for an ASU class called Death and Dying in Cross-Cultural Perspective. Most people agree that it is wrong to inflict unnecessary pain, suffering, or death on animals. And many people say that they love animals. In spite of this, we routinely cause harm to animals in ways that would objectively be described as abuse, for reasons that in almost all cases qualifies as frivolous. We often fail to recognize the self-interest and intrinsic worth of animals as thinking, feeling, sentient beings, as we focus instead on how they can be most useful to us. We may not always agree on exactly what constitutes the necessary use of animals, but surely in today's society it is not necessary to use animals for food, clothing, or the majority of other things we utilize them for. In fact, regarding food, the American Dietetics Association clearly states in a position paper that, quote, appropriately planned vegan, lacto-vegetarian, and lacto-ovo-vegetarian diets satisfy nutrient needs of infants, children, and adolescents and promote normal growth, end quote. Furthermore, our consumption of animal products has been linked to increasingly serious E. coli outbreaks and elevated rates of various degenerative diseases, and is devastating to the environment. Clearly our behavior is often inconsistent with our professed beliefs. Depending on the particular species of animals, our actions may reflect anything from resolute consistency to absolute contradiction. The basis for our belief that it is wrong to cause the unnecessary death of a human or other animal is the universally understood idea that death represents severe and perhaps ultimate harm to any perpetually aware or sentient individual. Yet while we regard some kinds of animals, such as dogs and cats, that many of us live with, as non-human persons whose lives and interests we value deeply and whose deaths we mourn, we accept with little or no thought the routine and often large-scale killing of other kinds of animals who exhibit no meaningful cognitive differences for food, clothing, biomedical research, and other uses. While most of us do not regard animals as mere, quote, things, end quote, they are nevertheless considered property under the law and are frequently treated as resources or commodities with considerable latitude granted to their respective owners. Animal rights theorist and Rutgers University law professor Gary L. Francione calls this inconsistent situation, quote, moral schizophrenia, end quote. His theory, which is based solely on animal sentience, calls for the abolition of animal exploitation, the promotion of veganism as the moral baseline of the animal rights movement, the rejection of measures that seek to regulate exploitation, and the clear rejection of violence both generally and as a tactic to further social change, in brackets Francione, quote, mission, end quote, end brackets. In 2009, the estimated 59 billion land and sea animals killed in the United States for food represented the vast majority of our animal use. It should be noted that this figure includes animals used for dairy and eggs, as they too are sent to the slaughterhouse once they are no longer economically productive. This cannot by any reasonable definition be considered necessary. Rather, the pain, suffering, and death we impose on non-humans is a combined result of cultural tradition, habit, convenience, and the pleasure and enjoyment we derive from eating animals, wearing them, and being entertained by them. Our conflicted attitudes toward animal death and killing represent speciesism, which is a form of discrimination based on species membership. We tend to take more seriously the protection of species we consider companion animals, those animals that are more closely related to us, such as non-human primates and animals that we perceive as cute, such as dolphins, seals, and pandas. Often intellectual capacity is also a factor that we apply when we insert animals into a moral hierarchy. However, none of these factors are relevant to one's ability to experience pain, suffering, or the fear of death. The majority of us understand that when it comes to humans, it is fundamentally wrong to deny basic rights to those who we deem less intelligent, less attractive, or more, quote, different, end quote. If we can acknowledge that the species of a sentient being is no more morally relevant than a person's intelligence, skin color, age, or gender, then we must dismantle the moral hierarchy we have created for animals and give their interests equal consideration. In other words, we must treat similar situations in similar ways. The value assigned to the lives of animals of a given species can be very different depending on the cultural context. In a 2008 essay, sociologist Roger Yates compared how the killing of dolphins is viewed in Japan and many Western countries. In the West, a number of animal advocacy groups reflecting, and perhaps to some extent influencing, public attitudes fund campaigns against dolphin slaughter by the Japanese fishing industry. Western culture values dolphins, while many Japanese consider the animals to be pests, similar to how cattle farmers in the West see foxes. Referring to a conversation about this with a Japanese friend, Yates wrote, quote, "However, one thing tends to unite the Japanese, and that is a generalized resentment to being told what to do by countries whose people are quite happy to chomp away on pigs, chickens, and cows. To the Japanese, this is a gross hypocrisy to be dismissed as such." End quote. Cultural differences regarding animals surfaced between 2008 Olympic Summer Games in Beijing, China, when officially designated Olympic restaurants were ordered not to serve dog flesh during the month of August, as a public relations measure directed at foreign visitors. Again, we have a hypocritical situation. In this case, visitors from other countries and cultures may have frowned upon eating dogs while not thinking twice about eating other sentient species, and the similar pain, suffering, and death that resulted. There was no evidence to suggest that the ban would have done anything to reduce overall animal suffering and death, as diners who could not order dog flesh were free to substitute another species of animal on the menu. From a moral standpoint, eating dogs is no better or worse than eating cows, chicken, pigs, or fish. That seeing dogs listed on restaurant menus in Beijing may offend or upset foreign visitors says more about Western speciesism than China's comparative level of civilization and modernity, wrote this author in 2008 blog Essays, in brackets, Hopes, end brackets. The case of Atlanta Falcons quarterback Michael Vick is strikingly illustrative of our conflicted attitudes about animals. Vick was convicted in 2007 in federal court for running an interstate dog-fighting operation in which dogs suffered terribly and often died as a consequence. Both the case itself and its heavy media coverage were steeped in hypocrisy and speciesism from the beginning. The NFL player grew up in a subculture where dogfighting was accepted. What Vick did was clearly wrong, and this was by no means a justification for his actions, but it represented an explanation that was most often overlooked by the media, various animal advocacy groups that weighed in on the issue, and the general public. Of course, in our larger culture, it is considered acceptable to eat animal products from animals that also suffer terribly and are killed. Morally, what Vick did was no different from what most of us do every day.